It's good to see you here this morning. I'm so glad that we get to start our day by worshiping together. I'm May and this is Paul. Would you stand and sing with us?
Remember those walls that we call sin and shame? They were like prisons that we couldn't escape. Then he came, and he died, and he rose. Those walls are rubble now. Remember those giants we call death and grave? They were like mountains that stood in our way. But he came, and he died, and he rose. Those giants are dead now. This is our God. This is our God. This is who he is. He loves us. And this is our God. This is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross and beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim, this is our God, King Jesus. Remember that fear that took our breath away. Faith so weak that we could barely pray. But he heard every word, every whisper. Now those altars in the wilderness tell the story of his faithfulness. Never once did he fail, and he never will. This is our God, this is who he is. He loves us. And this is our God, this is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross and beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim, this is our God, King Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sin? Nobody but Jesus. Who pulled me out of that pit? He did, he did. Who paid for all of our sins? Nobody but Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh. Who gets the glory and praise? Nobody but Jesus. Who rescued me from that grave? Yahweh, Yahweh, who gets the glory and praise? Nobody but him. This is our God, this is who he is. He loves us. And this is our God, this is what he does. He saves us. He bore the cross and beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim, this is our God, King Jesus. Bore the cross, beat the grave. Let heaven and earth proclaim, this is our God, King Jesus.
It's by no work of our own, but only by the sacrifice that Jesus made of his own life, that we can find new freedom in him. All sufficient merit, shining like the sun, a fortune I inherit by no work I've done. My righteousness I forfeit. One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple.
I tasted the world, seen more than enough. Its promise is fleeting. Of water and wine, I'd emptied the cup and found myself wanting. But there is a well that never runs dry. The water of life, the blood of the vine, is all I know. Is everything I have means nothing. Jesus, if you're not my one thing, everything I need right now, all I need is you right now.
Man, one of the reasons I love that song is that Jesus invites us to put him before all else. And that is actually one of the most loving things that he can do, because when he's first in our lives, right, there's joy. When he's first in our lives, there's peace. When he's first in our lives, man, so many of the responsibilities and the relationships we carry, they just find themselves in healthier, more joyful places. And so what I want to do, just while you all are standing, I just want to invite you to listen as I read something that Jesus himself said, kind of directly on this topic of even challenging others to put God first in their lives. This is what he says. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you for the time together this morning. We thank you for the chance to look into your word, to see the things that it has to offer us, to see the truth that it communicates to us about even the things that we're facing in this life. And I ask this morning, we ask that as we look into it, as we draw our attention to you, would you help us to gain insight, to gain understanding, to learn from this what we can put into practice in our own lives for the sake of greater joy, of greater peace, and a richer sense of purpose in this life. For all this, we ask and pray in your name. Amen. Amen. Go ahead and grab a seat. For those of you who haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name's Trevor. I serve as the campus pastor here at SMCC Lehigh, and just want to say thanks so much for coming on out. Hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. Actually, one of the things we're doing as a campus in the midst of this holiday season is a food drive, just as a way for us, as a community that's in the valley and for the valley. This is a wonderful opportunity for us really to come together and serve those around us in this valley who are finding themselves in a position of need, especially around the holiday season. Is a great time to do this. So the invitation is just, next time you're out shopping for groceries, to grab a couple of extra things and bring them on out to the box that is decorated with Christmas wrapping out in the lobby. I just want to, a lot of people have kind of brought some stuff out already, so just want to say thank you for participating in that. Great way for us to care for those alongside of us in this valley. All right, with that, we're continuing and actually bringing to a close today our series called The 7 Woes, where Jesus has been, making these 7 pronouncements of judgment in a public fashion against the religious leaders of his day. And so we'll get into breaking that down. But on the way to that, one of the interesting things, I think, to get our conversation started is that as a parent, I'm sure this happens in so many other areas of life as well, but as a parent in particular, it feels like one of the phrases that you get to hear so often, maybe even get to say so often, is the phrase, "I told you so." I told you so. Like, for example, when a kid doesn't want to eat breakfast, and you're like, you're going to be hungry in like a half an hour, and then a half an hour later, they're hungry. You're like, I told you so. Or let's say you're going outside to a park or something, and it's cold out. I don't want to wear a jacket. It's cold outside. Now, I'll be fine. I just don't want to wear one. I'll be okay like this. All of a sudden, 10 minutes later, I'm cold. I told you so. Sometimes we're on the receiving end of that ourselves, and but one of the interesting things about this phrase, "I told you so," is that so often this kind of wraps up the story. It's the conclusion, it's what brings it to an end, but the truth is there's also another phrase that typically opens up these types of experiences, and the two serve almost like bookends together, right? And while I told you so brings it to a close, the phrase that opens it is the phrase, it's your choice. It's your choice. Here are the details of your situation. Here's my perspective. Here's my take on what these actions are going to lead to, what these decisions are going to produce, what the consequences will be of continuing in this direction. But at the end of the day, hey, it's your choice. And this actually, I think when we bring this series to a close today, as we kind of bring these 7 woes to a wrap-up, I think one of the things we'll see is that Jesus, throughout the entirety of these 7 woes, what he has been doing is making this point remarkably clear in his own day and age, that if the religious leaders, if they continue in this direction, if they continue with this attitude, if they continue with these decisions, that what it will lead to is nothing good. But at the end of the day, it's their choice. And the goal of this series has been to take these dangers that Jesus is bringing awareness of and to, kind of delve into them in a way that gives us an understanding of what these same dangers are for our own spiritual lives as well, so that we can take that information, make different decisions, and actually avoid it within our own lives. But at the end of the day, the same thing that Jesus said to them holds true for you and me as well. What we do with this information, what you do with this information, it's your choice. But I think before we get to the decision point today, one of the things that's helpful to do is just to consider, what is Jesus getting into within this final woe? And so with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. Matthew chapter 23, picking it up at verses 29 to 32. This is what he goes on to say. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." Okay, so if anyone's joining us, right, we've been in this series for 7 weeks, but if anyone's kind of joining us today, teachers of the law and Pharisees, these are the religious leaders of the day. So, if you have a problem with your car, you go to a mechanic. If you have a problem with your teeth, you go to a dentist. If you had a question about your spiritual life or about a relationship with God, these were the people you went to within the first century if you lived in Israel. But Jesus calls them hypocrites because they weren't good at it. They weren't good. He says that you do all of the things that on the surface display a relationship with God, but ultimately it's just a performance, right? They prayed, they served, they gave, they did all of these things, but it was as if they were performing on a stage to win claps from people, and at the end of the day, it had nothing to do with God at all. And so he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." He goes on to say, "You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then and complete what your ancestors started." Okay, so Jesus, as he's been saying these 7 woes, he has been ramping up in intensity throughout, and this is the culmination of all of them right here. And he's just about to the boiling point where he breaks loose, but first he opens with this. And he says, "You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous." And what he's unpacking here is that throughout the history of the people of Israel, there were prophets who played significant roles within the society, within the people of Israel, right, within the people of God. And it wasn't a role of authority or leadership or anything like that, or governing or anything of that nature. Instead, the role of a prophet was essentially to kind of remind people of where they were at in the context of their relationship with God. So within the Old Testament, the people of Israel, they lived in a relationship with God where if they did good, they would get good. If they did bad, they would get bad, something that you could call religion, right? And the terms of this are all dictated within the Old Testament. And Jesus, thankfully, he invites us into something else entirely. That's not even the relationship with God that he invites us into. It's not based on how good or not good we are. It's based entirely on him. So there's rest to be found there. There's peace to be found there. But in the Old Testament, it was do good, get good, do bad, get bad. And so the prophets, their role was essentially to look at society, to see the decisions that were being made, the things that were happening, and then with clarity to essentially explain that, hey, if these things continue to happen, these will be the consequences. This is what's going to happen. And typically, it was not good news. And typically, those who deliver bad news are not all too favored, right? People don't tend to enjoy those people all that much. And so there's also, part of part of the tradition of the history of the prophets within the history of the people of Israel is that they were met with violence in response to them delivering these messages. Many of them were killed. And so in the first century context, these religious leaders, they would build tombs for the prophets. They would decorate the graves of the righteous. And it was a way for them to say, if we had lived at the time that these prophets were killed, we would have stood with them. We would have supported them. We would have been on their side. And yet Jesus is saying, the very fact that you make this assumption, that in and of itself is the most direct indication that you would not have stood with them. You would have stood against them. You wouldn't have been alongside of them when they were being stoned and sawed in half. You would have been the ones doing the stoning and the sawing. And so Jesus challenges them here. And there's something I think kind of interesting about this. I think if you delve into some of the heart dynamics around this, for me personally, I can kind of understand where they're coming from if I'm 100% honest, because what they're doing is they're operating out of this desire to be righteous. This desire to see themselves as good people, or at the very least to see themselves as people who are trying to make the world better. And so they look back on these historical events, and out of that desire, they make the assumption that if we had lived then, we would have done better. And I think that's an understandable desire. But I think there's one quote that comes to mind to me, and when I think in light of that desire, that I think is helpful and even in some ways challenging to that tendency. It comes from a German pastor who was a pastor in the midst of Nazi Germany. And this is one of the quotes that he wrote. Martin Niemöller is his name. He said, "First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." In other words, hindsight is 20/20. I think what he's saying is that if I could go back knowing what I know now, I would make different decisions. I would go about this differently. But in the midst of it, it was complicated. It was unclear. I wasn't sure what to do. And so he made, in a sense, the decision he made at the time with the information that he had. But hindsight is 20/20. And I think where this really comes into play is that sometimes it's easy to look back on different points in history and kind of, assume that if we were to put ourselves back in time, that we would be on the right side of history. And sometimes we do that, not even looking back historically. We even do that in our relationships now today. Like take for example, sometimes, maybe you're walking through Target and there's a kid that's just like throwing an absolute fit. Sometimes it's easy to make the assumption, if that was my kid, this would not be happening, right? It would not be going down like that. Or take like the organization that you're a part of. You could look at the decisions that are being made, maybe by leadership, and you're like, man, why are they doing that? That just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand this decision. Why, if I was in that place, I wouldn't do it like that. I would make a better decision. It's so easy, I think, so many times to look either back in history or even to look at the things that are happening in our lives today and to assume that if we were in the shoes of other people, we would make better decisions. And maybe we would, but maybe we wouldn't. And I think the thing that Jesus is pressing in on here is just the very fact that they allow their desire to see themselves as righteous to make the assumption that they are. Instead of, even for a moment considering that perhaps they wouldn't be on the right side of history. And if they had been willing to consider that, maybe that would have led them to learn something that would allow them to make different decisions in the present. And yet Jesus is saying the very fact that you have made this assumption indicates that you're just like those who came before you. And so he says, why don't you finish what they started? And what he's saying is, your ancestors, they killed God's messengers. But now God himself is here in human form. That's what Jesus is. And so he says, why don't you finish what they started? They killed the messengers. Why don't you kill the author now that he's here with you? And then Jesus, he basically hits the boiling point and he just kind of loses it. This is what he says, verse 33. He says, you snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly, I tell you, all this will come on this generation. What he's saying is that there is a judgment that will come in the day and age of the people that he is speaking to. And in a moment, we'll unpack what that is. But first, I think there's some other things here that are important to get to. The first of which is, can we just be clear that snakes are evil? Right? They're wicked. You could just look at them and you can tell they're not good. And studies have actually shown that humans recognize snakes faster than just about any other animal, large in part due to their evil nature. But I think it's worth considering that the very first time evil shows up in the biblical writings, it's in the first book, Genesis, in the 3rd chapter, Genesis chapter 3. The first time evil shows up in the biblical writings, it shows up in the form of a personified snake. And so, even within sort of the literary tradition of the biblical writings, snakes are actually associated with evil. And so when Jesus says, you are a brood of vipers, you snakes, what he's saying is that you are far more a child of the devil than you ever are a child of God, because your thoughts, your actions, your decisions, the direction you're heading in life, it is far more similar to the way the devil approaches things than to the way that God approaches things. You snakes, you are a child of the devil, is what he's saying. And so with that being the case, how will you escape being condemned to hell? And I think with this, it kind of raises a bit of a challenging subject for us. And there's a history behind this. Basically, in the history of the people of Israel, there were times when they actually were drawn into the worship of other gods. And I think sometimes if we're looking at that outside of context, it can sound almost like arbitrary. Like, what's the difference between worshiping this God and that God? Does it really matter? Well, the reason that God warned them against the worship of other gods is because it led to all kinds of destructive things, including things like child sacrifice. And so there was a valley alongside the city of Jerusalem, and child sacrifice had happened here in the history of the people of Israel. And on the other side of that, of course, it wasn't something or some place that anyone wanted to do anything in. And so it became a dump, essentially. And by the time the 1st century rolled around, it was filled with garbage to the extent that it was perpetually on fire. It was constantly burning. And so this valley came to represent symbolically the thing that Jesus is referring to when he describes hell, or when he speaks of hell. And I get that for so many of us. I think when we come to the question of hell, the question is, man, how can a God who is good, how can a God who is loving, how can a God who is merciful, how can a God like that ever condemn anyone to hell? How is hell even something that you can reconcile with a good and loving God? And I'll be honest, that's a challenging question. That is a difficult question to consider. But the idea of hell is that one day God's justice will actually consume evil and remove it from his world. But one other thing that I find to be incredibly helpful on this particular topic is the scholar and the author, C.S. Lewis, one of the things he said and wrote is that the doors of hell are actually locked from the inside. They're not locked from the outside. They're locked from the inside. Meaning, the way a person ends up there is through the continual rejection of God, the continual rejection of God's love, the continual rejection of God's mercy, the continual rejection of God's compassion, the continual rejection of any hint of a relationship with God whatsoever. And you can even see that with what Jesus is saying here. He says, therefore, I'm sending you prophets and sages and teachers. I'm sending you messengers of my love. And these messengers will effectively serve as a litmus test to give you a chance to either understand and receive God's love, or to flat out reject it and to reject him with it. Because hell is a place that is marked by not only the absence of God, but by the absence of every good thing that comes from him. And I can tell you, there is not a good thing in this life that does not come from God. And so hell is a choice. And essentially the choice is the rejection of God's love and every good thing that comes from him. And so Jesus says, not only will you reject their message, not only will you refuse to listen to them, but you will meet them with violence. You will kill them, you will murder them, you will beat them. And he says, so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel, which is the first murder recorded in the biblical writings. Way back in the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 4, Abel's murdered by his brother Cain, all the way to Zechariah, son of Berechiah, which is the final murder. And so Jesus is saying from the first one to the last one, all of this blood will come upon you, and it will happen in this generation. And so he's referring to something massive that will occur within the lifetime of these individuals. And if you ask the question, what that is, the clearest answer is the siege and the destruction of Jerusalem that takes place about 40 years after this conversation. The 19th century Scottish painter David Roberts, he gives us a depiction of this that I think is helpful just to even get a little bit of the graphic nature of it. What happened is, there were 3 times that the people of Israel would travel to the city of Jerusalem to celebrate a festival there, these festivals that God had given to them. Passover was one of them that takes place in the spring of the year. And so they traveled to the city of Jerusalem that spring to celebrate Passover. And as they did, the Roman military surrounded the city and allowed people to enter, but then did not allow them to leave. And so for months, the people were trapped inside, essentially starving to death, pushed to the brink, until finally all chaos erupted into this massive battle that resulted in the absolute and utter destruction of the city of Jerusalem. And if you look to the top left there, at the highest point, you can see the temple. And this is the event that actually brings about the destruction of the temple. And to this day, some 2,000 years later, the only part of the temple from that day that still remains is the western wall, known as the Wailing Wall, because it stands really merely as a reminder of what the temple used to be, and it has never been rebuilt. And so Jesus, as he reaches really sort of the climax of these 7 woes, the final piece of it is this proclamation of the judgment that will come upon them as a result of the decisions that they will make to reject again and again and again. And not only to reject, but even to meet the messengers with violence who are trying to tell them about God's love, that what it will result in is this catastrophic historical event. But I think what's so interesting here about this whole 7 woes is that, we've seen Jesus' anger kind of throughout the entirety of it. And throughout these 7 weeks, what we've been saying is that every woe is a compassionate alarm. And I'll be honest with you, to some extent, it's like, yeah, I'm sure there's compassion under the surface somewhere, but it also just seems like he's mad. It also just seems like he's angry, right? And so where exactly is the compassion within the midst of it? And I think we get into that here as the passage comes to a close. And part of what I think comes across so clearly within this passage is just the idea that anger is a secondary emotion. That anger is something that we feel. It is a real and legitimate thing that we experience within this life. And yet so often anger is a secondary emotion that arises out of some other emotion that is even more primary and kind of core to our experience. For example, we're into the Christmas season, so it's time to start rolling out these references. One of the most celebrated films in Christmas cinematic history is A Christmas Carol. The Christmas Story. My bad. We'll save the other one for another week. The Christmas Story. And one of the reasons why this film is classic is because it has one of the most archetypical bullies in all of cinematic history by the name of Scut Farkus. That's right, not Scott Farkus, Scut Farkus. That's his name. That's him on the right there. And all through the movie, the other kids, they're terrified of him because he's big, he's mean, he's violent, right? He's scary. And so they're absolutely terrified of this bully. And this is one scene where he essentially jumps them in the midst of this alley. And they're scared at first, but then the main character, Ralphie, all of a sudden his anger actually arises up out of his fear. And instead of backing away or cowering, he actually charges the bully, tackles him, and starts to pound on him. Because that's the way that anger works. So often it's like a guardian that is trying to protect us against the thing that we're afraid of. It's a secondary emotion that is arising out of the fear in this particular instance. But it's not always fear that it arises out of. And so the question is with Jesus, well, what is the primary emotion? What is underneath all of the anger that is spewing out in the midst of these 7 woes? And I think we see it really clearly when we look at what he says last. He says, verse 37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, You who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. You can really communicate a lot just by the way that you use names, right? Like, for example, when it comes to middle names, so often parents, they like pick out the middle name as a pair with the first name, and you're like, man, this is going to sound so good together. Like, this is such an eloquent pairing, and, you know, it's going to sound so sophisticated. And then the child is born, and the only time you use that middle name is when you're upset with them, right? That's really the only time that rolls out. But here, you know, within the Bible, we see that whenever a name is repeated twice, it always represents a really significant, pivotal moment within the life of that individual. This is the only time that we see it applied, not to a person, but to a city. But here, the pivotal moment is not because there's a turning point here for Jerusalem. It's because there's the absence of one. Because this is really the culmination of what Jerusalem has been doing for centuries in their continual rejection of God, with every one of the messengers that has come their way. And now finally, the author himself has shown up, and they have rejected him too, and are about to meet him with the most severe violence that they can muster. And so he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I've longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. It's like at this point, you can almost hear him sigh as he says this. You can hear the sadness. You can see that at this point, the anger has dissipated, and what really is left underneath is just grief. Because he loves this city, he loves these people, and yet they want nothing to do with him. And so, I think when we look to this, what we see is that over and over again throughout these 7 woes, what Jesus has been saying is that the direction you're going, the choices you're making, this is what it's going to lead to. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. And I think if we're to sort of summarize what he's saying in this particular woe, and even in all 7 of them when you put them together, really the main heart of the message is just this: woe to those who reject the love of God. Woe to those who reject the love of God, which I think for so many of us raises the question, where do we see the love of God within our lives? Where do you see the love of God in your life? You know, some of you might be saying to yourselves, well, I've not seen it, right? You know, maybe I've been through all of these awful things in my life and I haven't seen the love of God. Maybe I've just had an ordinary life, just a normal life, and the love of God hasn't been something that has really shown up for me. One of the convictions that I have personally is that the love of God is something that is pursuing each and every one of us. And it's not something that we always see within each and every season of our lives. It's not always something that is incredibly visible. But if you and I were to sit together, if we were to gather together, you know, and sit down at a cafe somewhere with a couple of nice maple pecan lattes, maybe a cherry scone we could split, and you were to share your story with me, it's my bet that we could peel back the layers and at a certain point see the ways that through every season of your life, God's love has been there for you. Almost like a trail of breadcrumbs that is intended to lead you back to him. But sometimes we don't always see that. And so what I want to do, what I want to do is, you know, attention and what we do notice and what we don't notice is kind of an interesting thing in this life. There was actually a study done about selective attention, and the way it works is, you know, they had this video, this recording, and there was two different teams of 3 people passing basketballs back and forth. And one team's they're wearing white t-shirts, and the other team, they're wearing black t-shirts. And the way this works is you're intended to, the study was basically trying to figure out how many people could watch those with the white t-shirts and count how many times they pass the ball back and forth to each other. And so the idea is, can you like look at it and sort of like block out what's happening with those wearing black t-shirts? Can you like block out what's happening there? Just pay attention to the white t-shirts in the midst of all of it and see and count how many times did they pass the ball to each other. It's about a 20 or 25 second clip. And so what I want to do is actually just play it and see how many of you can count how many times they pass the ball. So if you've seen this before, don't spoil anything. Just let people count for themselves. But let's go ahead. Can you count the white T-shirt passes?
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Okay, we'll pause it right there. Okay, I got 3 questions for you. Okay, who got 15 passes? Nice. Okay, good stuff. Who got 15 passes and saw the gorilla? Okay, final question. Did anyone get the right number and not see the gorilla? Okay, all right, there we go. I appreciate your honesty. The first time I did this, I did not see the gorilla. I did not see one. But if we roll it back, there is a gorilla that walks out in the middle of this, turns to the camera, beats its chest, and then continues to walk across, which is a wonderful illustration for selective attention. That's right. And so the point of this is that so often I think it can be incredibly easy to miss the love of God in our lives simply because we're paying attention to so many other things. And if we just stop and pause for a moment to peel back the layers and to recognize something that is actually incredibly visible in our lives, what we'll see is that the love of God is something that has been there for us in each and every season. And just like the gorilla, one of the things that's good about that is once you have seen it, you can't unsee it. And it makes it so much easier to recognize the ways that the love of God is with you and for you and even pursuing you in each and every season of life. And so, again, if we're at that cafe with the maple pecan lattes and a cherry scone, and we're talking about your story, these would be some of the places that I would look to perhaps find some breadcrumbs of God's love that are intended to lead you back to Him. I think relationships that enter our lives at pivotal moments, those can be incredibly powerful things. Moments when God protected us from some significant danger. I've got some of those that I look back in my story and shudder at them. Moments when God allowed the consequences of our poor decisions to impact us. Sometimes the actual consequences themselves are evidences of God's love. Moments of joy, beauty, and wonder. The truth is, every good thing in this life is a gift that is given from the one who made it. And so moments of joy, beauty, and wonder are actually gifts of love as well. Moments when you realize you had built your life on something false. Those can be incredibly painful moments, and yet they are moments that give way to healing and to building a life on actual truth with Jesus. Moments when you realize God brought something good out of something awful that happened to you. If I look back over my life and my story, I can see all the first 6. I can see every single one of those within my life and within my story. But I think the most significant example for all of us is just Jesus and His death on the cross. The reality that He stepped into our humanity. He lived the perfect life you and I never could. He died on the cross in our place to bring about the possibility of our forgiveness, our redemption, our restoration to the relationship with Him that we were made for. That is the most significant example of God's love demonstrated for you that you could ever find. And so what we see at the end of this series is that Jesus, He wept over a city that had already made its decision. And yet for each and every one of us, God's love still stands waiting. And the truth is, God's love is scattered throughout our lives like breadcrumbs that are intended to lead us back to Him. But the question is, once we recognize it, what will we choose to do? At the end of the day, what we see from Jesus' words are, it's your choice. But the bottom line is, happy are those who receive the love of Jesus. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we give you praise this morning for the way that you, in every situation, meet us with grace, meet us with truth, meet us with compassion, meet us with challenge. And we can know that even in frustration, even in anger that at times we see displayed in these biblical writings, we know that the motivation is always love. And And so we thank you for that. We know that your love continues to pursue us in this life. We ask that you would help us to see it more and more, to savor it more and more, to treasure it more and more, and that it would lead us to grow in our relationship with you so that we could know the joy and the peace and the purpose that you offer to us. So for all these things, we thank you and we praise you together this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.
To most people, the word abide means to obey a certain set of rules. I want you to help me finish this sentence. As long as you live under my roof, you will abide by. If you haven't said it, you've heard it. And that can be true. But in the Bible, we see abide used in a different way. We see it used to describe dwelling or drawing near. And Psalm 91 says this: He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him I will trust. You'd be hard-pressed on any given day at the end of the day not to find one of my kids curled up next to me. Even my oldest, who's grown and out of the house now, will come up to me and she'll put her head on my shoulder. Whether it's joy or whether they're having just a hard time, they trust me with those emotions. To them, I am a source of comfort. And in the same way, we can come to God. We can come to Him with our hurts. We can come to Him with our joy. In those moments, we can just tell Him, God, I know that I can't do anything apart from you, but I know that with you, I can make it through all things. And it can be hard to trust Him with that. It can be hard to just let go of the things that we have on our plate and to just sit with Him and dwell with Him in those moments, because we do get so caught up in the busyness. But for the next few moments today, could we just take our time and could we just sit and dwell in His presence today and trust Him with what we have? As we're singing this last song, I want to encourage you to just let the week come as it does. But right now, let's just abide in His presence. Would you stand and sing with us?
I depend on you. I depend
Be my all, my treasure, my prize. I am yours forever, you're mine. Draw me close and teach me to abide. When I pass through death, as I enter rest, I depend on you. I depend on you for eternal life, to be raised with Christ. I depend on you. Oh, I depend on you. You're the way, the truth, and the light. You're the well that never runs dry. I'm the branch and you are the vine. Draw me close and teach me to abide. Be my strength, my song in the night. Be my all, my treasure, my prize. I am yours forever, you're mine. Draw me close and teach me to abide. I am yours forever, you're mine. Draw me close and teach me to abide.
All right. Yeah, thank you all so much for coming on out. Just a couple things I want to let you know about. First off, if you're new with us, one of the first couple times you've been here, we'd love to connect with you. The easiest way to do that is there's a card in the back of the seat in front of you, like what you see up on the screen. Just want to invite you to, if you'd like to grab that, fill out as much as you're comfortable with. You can drop it off in the black box on the wall on your way out of this room, or even the basket at the green table in the lobby. Love to take you out for coffee or lunch, just hear your story. Also, we're into the Christmas season, so we got all kinds of things. Two of my favorite things in any season, well, in Christmas season, are Christmas and dessert. And next Saturday, there's a wonderful opportunity that I myself don't get to participate in because it's a women's Christmas dessert, but many of you get the chance to do this. And so just a wonderful chance to come on out, have a fun time. There's going to be great dessert at this thing and a great chance just to connect with other women who call this campus home and even to invite some friends. I know that we're trying to get a final number to our caterer, so if you could sign up quickly if you plan to go to this, that would be a wonderful thing. Second off, in a few weeks, we got Lessons and Carols, December 17th. The idea here is a great chance to invite a friend or some family. Basically, it's a night of Christmas carols, stories, and of hot chocolate and hors d'oeuvres as well. Should be super fun, so I'm looking forward to that. We've got other things as well coming in the Christmas season. We'll let you know about them in the weeks to come. But lastly, just want to say that I continue to be incredibly grateful for the generosity of this community. This is an incredibly generous group of people. A couple weeks ago, I had the chance to go to a baby shower with a couple, that they moved out here 3 years ago, not knowing anyone, not knowing a soul in Utah. And now 3 years later, as they're celebrating the growth of their family, they're doing so surrounded by people, surrounded by friends who know them and who love them and who they know and love as well. And the truth is, that's only possible because of the generosity of this community, that and so many other stories like it. So if that's something you'd like to participate in, there's several ways to do so. But thank you all for coming out. We will see you next Sunday.